I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and this is LoveSport Radio. Amid all the Russian escalating problems, we've almost forgotten that there's this thing called Brexit. So my next guest is David Scullion, who's the Deputy Editor of Brexit Central. Hi, David.
Hiya.
A couple of developments in the last day or so. One, that the transition period or the implementation period seems now to have been cut short, and we in Britain have agreed to this. David Davis has agreed to it. So it looks like that's just another step in our constant concessions that we keep making. And secondly, this business that Sky News are talking about today, that the government's busy sort of doing secret deals with companies and getting them to sign non-disclosure agreements about their post-Brexit plans. What do you make of all this?
Well, it's worth mentioning that the EU has also made concessions. So Britain's now free to sign our own trade deals during the transition, and it seems like we're going to get our seats back on the World Trade Organization. That's the body that sets trading rules across the world, and also helps set fishing quotas as well, which you know is not an unparalleled good on the fishing quota front. But in terms of the non-disclosure agreement, you can see why the government are concerned about this, because a lot of these talks they're going to be having are going to be commercially sensitive. They don't want it to affect the negotiations. So you can understand their caution.
But you get, the trouble with those kind of arrangements. I can see your point. The government doesn't want to sort of shout from the rooftops about everything it's doing in terms of Brexit, but it does give ammunition to the opposition, who've been all over the place saying, why can't they be transparent? Why are they doing these secret deals? What do you say to the opposition about this?
Well, I think they're just going to use anything they can to try and make the government look bad and make Brexit look bad. But, what have we seen since the referendum result? We've seen foreign direct investment is at an all-time high. Britain was ranked as the best country in the EU to do business with. And, I think people need to get a bit more optimistic about this process, and even if you voted to remain, I think it's really worth just getting on board for at least a few years. Let us get out and have a bit of optimism about the things that we can do outside the European Union.
Is that the situation then with the transition period or implementation period? Why is it that Theresa changed the name of that, for God's sake? But we'll call it the implementation period to please the Prime Minister. What? It's the case now then that Europe has conceded that we will be able to make deals during that period.
Yeah, that's right. So we're going to be able to sign trade deals with other countries. Being inside the European Union, being inside the customs union, it means that you can't sign your own independent trade deals. But the EU has conceded that during that transition period, we are going to be able to go out and negotiate with other countries and probably take our seat on the World Trade Organization, which is going to be really helpful for Brexiteers. That's one of the points that Britain was thinking of just doing anyway, but would have upset the Europeans a bit. So it is quite a big concession. Obviously.
No, I agree. Yeah. So
we've had talks about this already. Yeah.
So during the implementation period, we will obviously still be in the customs union and indeed in the single market, and yet now for the first time the EU has conceded that we'll be allowed to act as if we weren't and go out and make our own trade deals around the world. Yes?
Well, that's partially right. I mean, the trade deals that we sign will only come into force after we actually leave, so actually after the implementation period. So, the government are branding this as an implementation period, but really, in all intents and purposes, we are still in a kind of halfway house during that transition period, which isn't, Brexiteers aren't totally happy with the transition period, but a lot are just looking to the future and saying, if we do finally get out at the end of it, this is something we can stomach for 2 years. Yeah,
and until this development, we were facing the absurd prospect of being in the transition period stroke implementation period and not being allowed to talk to anyone about our future trade plans, right?
I mean, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? As a sovereign nation that we were going to become afterwards, that we'd be barred from doing that. And to be honest, a lot of the cards are with the British Prime Minister. It doesn't always seem like that, but if we don't opt for this transition period, there's no Brexit bill to pay. So if we don't stay locked into the EU system, there's no legal obligation to pay that big bill. And the EU haven't altered their budget to deal with a loss of money. So we do have a lot of the cards in this negotiation. We pay 16% of the EU budget, and then we could sign and also implement trade deals on day one if we didn't opt for that transition deal. I'm just quite concerned that the government's not really preparing hard enough for no deal, and I think that the civil service really need to get on top of that and see this as a viable outcome, not so that we can kind of preempt it and so that we can go for the no deal option, but because it's a really sensible thing for a government to do to prepare for that eventuality.
But it looks as if this time last week we probably would have said it was looking depressingly as if we're heading for no deal. But now that they've made these concessions on the implementation period, I think that's quite kind of significant, and it sort of indicates that, contrary to their past behaviour, that the EU bureaucrats, Barnier and the mob, will be prepared to make their own concessions, and we may edge inexorably towards a reasonable Brexit deal.
Well, let's hope so. I mean, it's been a bit of a roller coaster of emotions, and sometimes it feels like it's going really well. Sometimes it feels like it's going absolutely terribly.
It does, doesn't it? It is, yeah. One day, I mean, right now, I think the Brexiteers will be feeling quite confident. This time 2 days ago, not so much. This is. Yeah, I think you're right. It's a roller coaster, isn't it?
I think you're right, but I think there are plenty of battles to come over things like fishing, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Fishermen are really not happy about being in this implementation period, being in the common fisheries policy during that, because that would mean re-signing up to all of these regulations and laws that we could have been free from. So by adopting all the EU law doesn't mean that we'd stay in that common fisheries policy. So they'd be really, really angry if we stay in that transition period.
I was watching the UN getting together last night to discuss the Russian crisis, and the Dutch in particular came four square to our support, completely condemning Russia and offering UK, unmitigated support. But, meanwhile, the French basically echoing the Kremlin's line, prove that this was a chemical attack from the Kremlin. So we didn't exactly get, Macron and the gang to come to our aid in this. What do you make of that?
I mean, all nations are different. I mean, since then, the French have said, it does look like it's Russia, and they've agreed with the Prime Minister. It took a little bit of fixing, but that has now happened. But, this just shows that Britain's going to essentially remain similar in terms of its foreign policy after Brexit. We haven't isolated ourselves as the Remainers said that we would. We don't want to pull up the drawbridge and these kind of things. We want to engage with European partners and with the rest of the world. So it's just, it's not really an issue that's going to be affected by Brexit. And the Prime Minister's always said that we're going to, we should want to share our security, technical ability in security matters, and that's something I think we will agree on.
I realise that this is an inevitability, but we saw Corbyn basically playing low politics with the Russian crisis, by saying, "Oh, why don't we send the chemicals to the Kremlin?" and basically supporting Russia against us. I mean, in terms of Brexit, one of the problems is that in a democracy, it's the opposition's job to attack the government, at every opportunity. And so, whilst Davis and the boys are trying to negotiate us a Brexit deal, Corbyn and the gang are just sort of shooting them down at every turn. I mean, is there no way we can persuade Sir Keir and Jeremy to be a bit more reasonable in terms of the nation's interest as opposed to the Labour Party's interest? I think I know the answer to that, but you tell me what you think.
Well, look, Corbyn's being totally consistent. He won't support the government over their plans on Brexit, even though it's a big national issue that we should all get behind, and he won't support the government on Russia. So I think, in that sense, he's being consistent. I mean, his backbenchers are not happy with the way he dealt with the Russia situation. They've all lined up in support of the Prime Minister. But, I think with Corbyn, actually, he is a Eurosceptic, and it's people around him like Sir Keir Starmer who actually are Europhiles and are pushing him into this position of, staying in the customs union but not the single market. It's a weird situation.
I think Corbyn's hypocrisy on Europe has loomed large throughout this ongoing saga. Great to talk to you, David. Come back and talk to us soon. That's David Scullion, Deputy Editor of Brexit Central. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and this is Love Sport Radio.